Welcome to the Progress Texas Happy Hour.
Welcome back to the Progress Texas Happy Hour. I'm Progress Texas Advocacy Associate Tina Mowens. Picture our Texas Gulf Coast. You've probably taken a trip, have relatives, or are even listening from South Texas. You've seen the oil rigs, the windmills on your drive down, but what you might be missing is the massive industrial build-out for Elon Musk's vanity trip to Mars. Musk might be maneuvering a coup d'etat and takeover of the White House and our national parks, but he's our problem back home in the Lone Star State too, right down to the valley where his SpaceX headquarters are actively polluting our communities and devastating local ecosystems. Here to talk more on SpaceX, frontline communities in the valley fighting this build-out, and even some discussion on liquefied natural gas, or LNG. Today, we have Dr. Christopher Basaldú as our esteemed guest. Dr. Basaldú is Eshtoqna, human being, a member of the Carrizo Comecrudo Nation, lives in Brownsville, Texas, and grew up in Brownsville and Corpus Christi. Dr. Basaldú is one of the founding members of the South Texas Environmental Justice Network, or STEJN. More on that soon. And as a tribal member, he struggles alongside tribal leadership to protect sacred sites, to restore lifeways, and to promote environmental and social justice in South Texas. Dr. Basaldú earned the degree of Ars Baccalaureate from Harvard University in the study of religion, and the degrees of Master of Arts in American Indian Studies, and the degree of Doctor of Philosophy and Anthropology from the University of Arizona. I'd be remiss not to mention the doctor's many credentials, and that we have a cultural studies professor on during unrelenting attacks on public and higher education. Thank you for joining us and giving our audience some expert and community insight into what's going on in the Valley. Let's get started and welcome.
Nanapale, thank you very much. Thank you for having me. And I say Teapale to everybody. Hello, and I hope everybody's having a good day. Mautapele.
First up, Dr. Basaldú, welcome, and please tell us about yourself and your work with the South Texas Environmental Justice Network as a co-founder.
Let's see where to begin. Well, I spent most of my childhood and early childhood here in Brownsville, Texas, just because of where my family and extended family live and grew up. We were kind of going back and forth between Brownsville and Corpus Christi, Texas a lot. So I do have a lot of great fondness and connection to the coast. And as far as like the South Texas Environmental Justice Network, there are several of us here in Brownsville that had been volunteering and working and organizing to fight against the liquid natural gas build out, the proposed LNG export facilities at the Port of Brownsville, and also to fight against SpaceX and then the expansion of SpaceX, and now the almost complete takeover of Boca Chica Beach and the area by currently what SpaceX is doing. We're grassroots, and we try to work as best within our community, not just to raise awareness about environmental issues, but environmental justice, like how these issues actually relate to the sort of greater political, economic, and environmental issues that surround us here in the area. And so, you know, there's a group of us here that started working together many years ago and are now co-founded this grassroots work together. And we also work very closely with other coalition partners here in Brownsville and the Rio Grande Valley. And as part of environmental justice, we also work very closely with the original indigenous people of the land, the Carrizo Comecrudo tribal nation, the Eshtoqna. So the original human beings going all the way back to the beginning of human occupation in what's now called the Rio Grande Valley.
Thank you so much for sharing that, and especially about the STEJN. We'll start today with much of the STEJN's recent work in the Rio Grande Valley, as you stated. It's involved a lot of fighting against the Space Exploration Technologies Corp., or SpaceX, headquartered at the Starbase development site near Brownsville, Texas, where you grew up. The space technology company just got positive publicity for sending up the capsule that retrieved the lost NASA astronauts from Crew 9. But lost in this news story, yet again, are the countless residents that live near this operation who did not choose to be polluted by Elon Musk's whims. The ramifications for his actions are unmeasured and dangerous, with Starship space trash and debris littering our skies all the way to the Caribbean. The HQ move to Brownsville in 2024 was initially introduced as an opportunity to add jobs to the area, create positive change for the community. Yet, to this day, the company still refutes claims addressing any negative impacts, like the discharge of industrial wastewater, aka byproducts leached into the water supply from building these massive rockets and launching them. Could you please share with us the public perception of SpaceX in the area and what the fight against Elon Musk has involved?
Well, of course, always with the perception in the area, it's going to be, it'll depend on who you ask. But, the community members that we interface with and that we organize with, we don't have a positive view of SpaceX. Very often when there have been launches, there's not enough of a warning about the launches that gets distributed out to a lot of people. Many people down here in the valley are not terminally online, or they're not completely absorbed in social media 24/7, or they simply don't find it useful to follow Elon Musk's every step. So in that case, there have been some launches where they didn't know that a launch was about to happen. And in so doing so, they were scared. They thought that maybe there was an earthquake involved. And, one of the damages of just how SpaceX is operating, which of course is a private venture, there's no automatic public good or public benefit. But in sort of the Musk and Silicon Valley attitude of move fast and break things, Musk and SpaceX, they don't care about who they're damaging, what lives they're damaging, whether that be physically or socially or environmentally. They just don't care. They don't care about our community. And when they say that they're bringing jobs to the valley, or if they say they're going to do something good for the valley, that's all just PR. It's all just spin. There's no real benefit happening. And, some of these benefits, aside from just the direct pollution, and if you're building an industrial rocket building factory on a pristine beach in the middle of a wildlife area, SpaceX claiming that there's no negative impact it's not credible. It's not credible, and it's only propaganda to say such a thing. For those of us who are a little bit older and who grew up in Brownsville, we have a living memory of what that area looked like before the invasion of SpaceX and before SpaceX colonization. It truly was and is just one of the most beautiful spots in Texas, one of the most beautiful places in Texas. And, building an industrial factory out there, and now them wanting to build their own town or their own city it's going to be harmful for generations to come, because they're stealing what little, sort of like nature, if you want to call it that, they're stealing what little natural areas or natural habitat that still remain in the Rio Grande Valley and along the Texas Gulf Coast. We've had so many economic decisions or political decisions, selfish political decisions, to sort of sacrifice the entirety of the Texas Gulf Coast to the oil and gas industry or petrochemical industries. And that's trying to happen here in Brownsville as well. But we've had that sacrifice to the detriment of the people. It's not only the people were calling for that, it's that politicians or bankers or CEOs have wanted that destruction. So there's not a lot of that original beauty on the Texas coast left, and it still exists in the eastern Cameron County and in the Brownsville area. And yet local elected officials are still working hard to give away what's left of our natural environment or natural areas. And what it appears to be to people down here is that SpaceX is inch by inch and creep by creep. They're literally trying to steal away Boca Chica Beach and access to that entire area, since there's only one road to get out there, Highway 4, State Highway 4. That just by inch or by step, they are trying to take away the whole thing. right now in the Texas legislature, there have been bills introduced that would basically hand over more power to SpaceX to control access on this state public road, Highway 4. Boca Chica Beach itself is a public beach, and if SpaceX is given more authority to shut down Highway 4 and therefore access to the beach, they claim for security or they claim for public safety, they will essentially, the effect is going to be that they're stealing away the public beach from the public, a free and public beach from the public. That is going to diminish the quality of life for everybody here in South Texas and in the Rio Grande Valley. And last but certainly not least, these areas that we're talking about that are being damaged by LNG and by SpaceX are lands that are sacred to the Ixtocna, and they contain historic remains, archaeological remains, human remains going back many thousands of years. And SpaceX and Elon Musk and even local elected officials, state elected officials, and federal regulatory agencies, none of these organizations have ever consulted with the original native people of the land. So I just want to point out to everybody that that's a direct violation of the United Nations Universal Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. And therefore, as human rights violations, these projects are immoral. They are immoral and unjust on their face. And, to destroy sacred lands against the consent and against the wishes of the original native people is a continuation of the genocidal history that America seems to be so proud of, and that Musk and that Texas seems to be so proud of.
Thank you for sharing that. And that brings us to our next question for you, which is that another piece of this puzzle is the lack of regulation that allowed the water we drink, air we breathe, and land we depend on to be degraded. The STEJN just finished up a lawsuit a couple months ago against the TCEQ, or the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, or TCEQ, for this exactly. Please tell us about this fight against SpaceX's discharge of polluted water into the Boca Chica wetlands, a critical habitat and sacred native site, and what's next. Please also consider in your response and share about the history of rubber stamping pollution and sidestepping permitting around regulations that are meant to protect but so often fail our most marginalized community members.
So, for example, the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality is supposed to be sort of like the state environmental protection agency. And for quite a number of years now, they have been falling down on their job. Instead of protecting the environment or protecting the public in general, what they do is rubber stamp industry. And of course, Texas being Texas, they rubber stamp the oil and gas industry tremendously. What had been an issue with SpaceX is that after the disastrous first attempted launch of Starship Super Heavy, they destroyed their own launch pad. And Elon Musk, not being a genius, didn't realize that you need to suppress the energy of a launch, especially if you're bragging about it being the largest, most powerful rocket in human history. Human beings have had the technology of dissipating the energy of a rocket launch for many, many, many decades. And certainly for the entirety of my human lifetime, my short lifespan, the technology to have either a flame trench or a water deluge system or both has just been standard practice for many decades. This is proof in and of itself that Elon Musk is a liar when he says he's a genius, or that other people say he's a genius. He's not a genius, because you're not even using existing proven technologies for a technology that's been in use in multiple nations across the planet, and that is launching a rocket into orbit. Oh, by the way, Starship Super Heavy has never made orbit. It has never even completed an orbit around the planet. So billions of taxpayer dollars are being wasted by SpaceX to build rockets that go nowhere, but they pollute the land, or they pollute the skies, or they pollute the Caribbean.
Yeah, private and failed endeavors.
Private and failed. Consistent failures. But again, Elon is also a liar because every launch to him has been a success. Well, it's been a success in throwing away money that should be used for housing, healthcare, education, all of these other good things that we need. So they decided that they would build a water deluge system. Well, they never got a permit to build the infrastructure for the water deluge system. And then they used the water deluge system multiple times for launching without even applying for a permit. And then they finally applied for a permit in July of 2024. And so that permit was very, very poorly written. There were very few sort of environmental protection guidelines or standards for guidelines to protect the environment and to protect against pollution. And so we were just one of the groups that sort of organized against it and then tried to get people to make public comment, try to analyze the application and see where the shortfalls were and try to make TCEQ aware of that. TCEQ basically ignored the public's concern and decided to, this included, legal action. And TCEQ just ignored us, basically. Yeah. And
really good at it.
And then, of course, the TCEQ did decide to approve the permit. And sadly, because of the way the settler colonial nation state's legal system works, that mooted any litigation because there was more than one lawsuit. There was more than one lawsuit against TCEQ on this issue, or near this issue, regarding this issue. But it mooted those lawsuits, but TCEQ didn't address any of the concerns. On top of that, with TCEQ, the public and entities can request contested case hearings, or what's called contested case hearings. The commissioners of TCEQ sort of unilaterally denied all potential contested case hearings in this matter, which I find particularly offensive and irksome because some of the issues that were raised by the tribe especially were concerns about religion and concerns about history in that regard. It's not just, okay, do you have enough measurements in place to measure the amount of pollution when using the deluge system, which SpaceX, of course, doesn't. And TCEQ is not forcing that monitoring to be as stringent as it could be or should be. But, those are sort of those technical issues under environmental regulation and protection. Well, issues about religion, I would offer the public to think about this. The commissioners at TCEQ are not experts on religion. They're certainly not experts in religion history, and they're not experts about native religion or native spirituality at all, and don't have an authority to rule on that. However, they sort of unilaterally dismissed whatever religious concerns the tribe was bringing, and I find that to also be an example of Euro-American genocide against Native people, just ignoring concerns that are being legitimately brought forth by Native people and making an arbitrary decision like, well, this doesn't really count, we don't care about this, when they don't even understand the very basic principles that are being argued. So, TCEQ is not, in general, TCEQ is just not protecting the people. They're not protecting the land or the air or the water, which is their charge, even within the confines of the settler colonial government. And they are just handing and allowing pollution to happen at the convenience of the oil and gas industry, and in this case, SpaceX. Mm-hmm. And I find that hard to bear. There is another pending permit in front of the TCEQ about SpaceX wanting to dump 200,000 gallons of treated sewage wastewater daily. 200,000 gallons. Now, when SpaceX was just its factory facility, 200,000 gallons of wastewater a day being dumped directly into South Bay, that's an environmental catastrophe. That is exactly an environmental catastrophe. But I want to raise awareness amongst the public that Elon Musk's whole MO is to ignore regulation or believe somehow that regulations do not apply to him and his business ventures. So whenever there has been an agreed upon limit from SpaceX to the county or SpaceX to the state of Texas, SpaceX has blasted through those limits. He does not care. And for years, SpaceX had been violating the Clean Water Act, and it took literally years for the TCEQ to even certify or acknowledge that those violations were occurring. So just because TCEQ does not make a ruling and saying, oh, this person is polluting, or this facility is polluting water, is polluting the land, that just because TCEQ does not acknowledge it does not mean that the pollution is somehow magically not happening. Local people and journalists had been observing that this pollution and violation of the Clean Water Act has been happening for years at SpaceX, but SpaceX continues to claim that it's not polluting the environment at all. They claim that they have no significant environmental impact when they're writing their environmental statements or environmental evaluations to the Federal Aviation Administration. So shifting from TCEQ to the FAA. SpaceX tells the FAA that they're making no significant impact, no environmental impact that's worth worrying about. And it's all a lie. You cannot build an industrial facility with heavy metals and water use and oil and chemical products. You cannot build a facility, you cannot build a factory on pristine natural lands and claim that there's no environmental impact. Again, it's lying. I can't think of a polite word. It's just lying. But the fact that the Federal Aviation Administration wants to believe those lies to facilitate SpaceX is abhorrent. The fact that TCEQ not only wants to believe those lies, but gaslights the public and tells the public that everything is fine is also abhorrent and reprehensible. So we're getting that happening at the state level with TCEQ. We're getting it happen at the federal level with the FAA. These regulators refuse to hold SpaceX accountable, and they refuse to protect the interests of the public. And the interests of the public include having designated lands like wildlife refuges kept clean, kept natural. The public should have access to the public beach, period. It shouldn't be curtailed. And we shouldn't let private industry decide when and how it should be curtailed. There were supposed to be public meetings on this permit, and TCEQ canceled those public meetings locally here in Brownsville. They have yet to reschedule them. And this is on not the deluge water system, but on the waste sewage water. So let's tell it like it is. SpaceX wants to dump their barely treated sewage directly into South Bay. South Bay is not fully inundated with water all the time. These are algal flats, these are hypersaline lagoons that have water and don't have water depending on environmental conditions, depending on the amount of moisture, how much rain there's been, how the tides have been moving in and out. And South Bay is also very shallow. So you want to dump over 200,000 gallons of water a day into a bay area that sometimes is only an inch deep, 2 inches deep, 3 inches deep, sometimes doesn't have water at all. This is an environmental catastrophe if it were to happen. Like I said, Musk doesn't obey the signs. So he says, yeah, we'll be limited to 200,000 gallons of wastewater a day. Who's to say he's not going to do more than that? He has a long history of just breaking through whatever limits and ignoring regulations because he thinks they don't apply to him or his business. And now on top of that SpaceX wants to become its own city, its own town.
Factory town.
Yeah, a factory town, and those never work out well. It wants to become a factory town. Well, then that signals to us that he is envisioning a lot of expansion, and he wants people to live there under his thumb, under his rule, and under the threat of losing your job, which would mean you have to move out, right? So that's another level of control that, gets him very happy, but we should be very aware of. He's basically trying to get that water permit to be the sewage system for a municipality, and that's wrong. That in and of itself needs to invalidate this permit from DCEQ, because just having a permit for a factory to dump its toilet water onto the land, that's one thing. It's bad, it's wrong, it should be stopped. But here's the strategy, using the permit of a factory to dump its urine and fecal water onto the land, getting that approval, and then saying this is going to be sufficient for a municipality to treat its sewage water and dump that onto the land. That's completely, on its face, it's completely wrong. It needs to be fought. Some of us think that SpaceX in and of itself was a fraud to begin with. I mean, literally, they've spent billions of dollars from taxpayer money, from NASA, from the Department of Transportation, from the Department of Defense. They get a lot of their money from the Department of Defense. People need to know that. The technology he's trying to build, it really doesn't have a lot to do with going to Mars. It has to do with weapons systems. Otherwise, he would not be getting money from the Department of Defense. But my point is, how are you going to receive billions of taxpayer dollars and you can't even get a rocket into orbit? And he's done 8 attempts now, and all of them have ended disastrously with the loss of the Starship. And he's called every single one of them a success. The last 2 have distributed a lot of debris and pollution across the Caribbean and disrupted flight patterns for commercial airlines. This is a disaster. This is a disaster that some people keep jumping up and down, hopping up and down, thinking this is this miraculous, wonderful thing. It's like, I want people to wake up and open their eyes. This is a fraud. It's a scam. He's just getting more money to build rockets that go nowhere, to pollute a land and an area that he doesn't care about. He doesn't care about the people. He doesn't care about the land. It's an example of environmental racism because, the Rio Grande Valley in Brownsville is 95% non-white, 98% non-white. SpaceX was sited here so that it could destroy the lives of the lands of non-white people, non-white poor people, for the sake of a rich white man who is now openly embracing the ideologies of Nazism, of eugenics, of literal white superiority, genetically, biologically, culturally, over all non-white, non-European, non-wealthy people.
Yeah, right down to Brownsville.
Yeah, the man himself is reprehensible and must be stopped, must be neutralized.
A lot of pollution that we see on the Texas Gulf Coast, people feel it in their bodies. They get asthma, they get cancer. It's these long-term effects, but the SpaceX operations provides very visible and felt devastation. We've seen it in the skies. People's walls shake when launches happen. It's very apparent that this is destroying local communities and ecosystems, and still he gets to put private interests over the public and the communities that are facing the first and most devastating impacts.
San Antonio friends, join us in the Alamo City on Tuesday, May 6th for the first time since 2017 for a live podcast taping and fun get-together with like-minded progressives. You'll have a chance to visit with office holders, candidates, and activists, grab a beverage, share stories, and celebrate progress in Texas, which doesn't happen without you. During our Party for Progress and live podcast recording, come meet people doing good work to push progress forward in Texas. You can sponsor the event and this podcast and RSVP early using the link in our show notes. Hope to see you in San Antonio on Tuesday, May 6th.
For now, let's pivot to other concerns for RGV residents, also at risk of damaging coastal ecosystems and imposing unacceptable health and safety risks to the public. We're also here to talk about liquefied natural gas, or LNG, and how its development is central to the valley. Frontline communities in Port Arthur, Corpus Christi, Brownsville, Midland, and Odessa, and so many more other communities are left out of the conversation in protecting their health. Yet because of their proximity to LNG production, they see the first and most devastating repercussions. These neighbors, already overburdened by pollution and environmental degradation from decades of oil and gas development, are subjected to hurricanes and flooding, pipelines bursting or catching fire, and vast pollution-induced illnesses that range from asthma to cancer. Please tell us about LNG and how it relates to the valley.
So there are two proposed LNG export terminals proposed for the Port of Brownsville. And all of that land, of course, is ancestral land of the Ixtocna. And there is a sacred site that is actually registered, National Register of Historic Places, known as Garcia Pasture, which is the area known as Garcia Pasture is much larger than the site that's registered, the boundaries of the site that's registered with the National Register of Historic Places as Garcia Pasture. And so that smaller plot that's bounded and registered, that is within the boundaries of the lease, the Port of Brownsville's lease to Texas LNG. And it goes into a little bit of the area that is leased to Rio Grande LNG. That piece has already been destroyed. So having a natural area with the plants and animals that are indigenous plant and animal species, that's already been damaged. If Texas LNG were to move forward, it would completely obliterate one of the few sacred spaces that is actually designated, to the view of the government, right? Now, Rio Grande LNG, that project has already completely plowed under and devastated, more than 900 acres of what had been pristine wetlands. And now in that area, we've had really high winds this early spring. It's like a dust bowl effect out there. There's just dirt and dust flying in the wind, which didn't happen before because there were wetlands in place to stop that kind of aerial erosion, aeolian erosion, excuse me, if I want to be technical. It was really bad yesterday. I was there yesterday and it was awful. So we've lost all those wetlands, which is just going to be, that's going to increase flooding risks. That's going to increase damage. But if these LNG terminals move forward, there'll be even greater damage because they are also proposing to widen and deepen the Brownsville Ship Channel. The Brownsville Ship Channel is a man-made ship channel. It was completed back in the 1930s. And during the construction, or I should say destruction, caused by the Brownsville Ship Channel, there was an incredible amount of ancient villages of the Ixtocna that were just completely obliterated and destroyed. And workers and Brownsville officials would just go into the debris of the excavation and literally pull archaeological and historic evidence and keep them in their personal private collections at home. Some of that material ended up in of course, museums in Austin and in San Antonio. But I digress. A lot of what had been the history of Native peoples living in eastern Cameron County on the north side of the river here was just destroyed by that project. And that destruction has continued with the build out of the Rio Grande LNG project. Now I want to tell everyone listening that Rio Grande LNG, Texas LNG, and its accompanying pipeline, the Rio Bravo pipeline, all three of those projects lost their federal permit by court order of the Washington, D.C. Appeals Court on August 6th, 2024. But they refuse to stop working, and the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission refuses to issue a stop work order to Rio Grande LNG because they don't agree with the court's decision. I'm sorry, but regulators and bureaucrats, your feelings don't count. Your feelings, so what, you feel that the court is in error, it doesn't matter. You follow the order of the court, which they have been refusing to do. And of course, Rio Grande LNG is continuing to try to work as much as they can expand, even without the permit, and that's continuing to cause environmental damage. We're still trying to figure out where are they getting the extra earth or the dirt that they're bringing into the site in order to raise the site to fight against, of course, the possibility of flooding. Well, if you're on a floodplain and you've destroyed the wetlands that actually help with flooding, and you raise an industrial gas facility above the rest of the area because you want to protect the facility from flooding, you're increasing the flooding damage and risk of everybody else that isn't that. It's insane. It's just insane. And it's just insane. And the fact that this is proceeding illegally, that it is illegal. I want to add that the United States government, in their hysteria over the criminalization of human beings that are being called immigrants. These are human beings that just migrate and have the human right to migrate. But in America's xenophobic fascist hysteria to criminalize migrant people, there has been a steady increase in border militarization and law enforcement. And I point that out because there's an increase in law enforcement and law enforcement spending here in Brownsville and the Rio Grande Valley, but criminal activity, literal rule breaking by LNG private companies, because these are all private companies, by SpaceX, they're not being punished. They're not being policed or patrolled by law enforcement. It's crazy making.
And financed by so many oil and gas companies in this huge industry in Texas. And to be clear, many overseas banks. There's tons of foreign interest in this operation because Texas's coastline is dependent on global exports for LNG. And so there's this really large focus to get this build out done as quickly as possible at the expense of communities that have already seen the devastation and will continue to if the build out does occur further.
Right. And since it's the United States' oil and gas industry, it's all private. So there is literally no economic benefit to the people who are being destroyed and devastated by these projects. There's no profit sharing. There's no, hey, let's at least give you some money for the cancer that we're giving you. And then at the same time, because we have a privatized healthcare industry that does not serve the needs of the people, you add to the fact that many of these coastal communities of color, and especially here in Brownsville, you add to the fact that these are healthcare deserts, and we don't have access to healthcare, and people don't have the kind of money to pay for access to healthcare or pay for healthcare. We're literally watching our communities being created as sacrifice zones of death.
Now that our audience knows who's behind polluting the bodies, minds, and sacred ancestral lands of our RGV friends, between SpaceX and the LNG industry, so many more, could you please paint a picture of how and the degree to which pollution impacts your community members, the local ecosystems and coastal habitats, and your perspective as a member of the Carrizo Comecrudo Nation? What have you seen or heard from others there regarding both operations with SpaceX and LNG?
Oh, gosh. It's hard to say. It's hard to even talk about it. I want to call attention to like a potential worst case scenario disaster. Okay. What if, and there's a high probability that SpaceX will fail when it launches, well, that the launches fail. Their track record has been one of complete and utter failure. Imagine if the 2 LNG terminal build-outs were completed and they were fully operational. with all that methane and all that gas coming through the area. And again, all for export. None of that gas is for domestic use.
Right here. Exactly. Yeah.
And then imagine, SpaceX already brags about the Starship Super Heavy being the largest rocket in human history, but they want to make it even bigger so that it can theoretically carry cargo. So far, the only cargo it's ever carried was one banana, and it didn't even safely take that cargo to the Indian Ocean. That banana was incinerated to molecules and ashes when the Starship caught fire, broke up, and crashed into the Indian Ocean. But I digress. What happens if that rocket is launched and it malfunctions and it lands on these proposed gas export terminals, which are only located 5 to 6 miles away? 5 to 6 miles. Theoretically, I hear that there are people that run that much in the morning before they go to work. That's a very small distance. And if you have this catastrophic explosion caused by methane, because SpaceX uses methane, liquefied methane, and liquid oxygen in order to be the rocket fuel for this rocket, you have that kind of an explosion on an operating gas export facility, a methane facility. How catastrophic will that destruction be? Now, add on top of that Brownsville and surrounding area is a healthcare desert. We only have a few small hospitals. We don't have the capacity for a mass casualty event. Plus, there's only one road going to and from Boca Chica Beach, which SpaceX is now trying to colonize. And there's one major road, Highway 48, that connects Brownsville to Port Isabel, South Padre Island. That road, for a long stretch, is the road where these LNG facilities are sited. To the south of the facility is a ship channel. You can't drive an ambulance on the water in the ship channel. And so you have a 2-lane road in each direction on Highway 48. How are you going to get enough ambulances out there to take people and back if the roads are even passable after a catastrophic explosion of that magnitude? This is a problem. And people can't even afford to go to the hospital. We are setting ourselves up for an absolute disaster. And our local officials, federal regulators, state regulators, none of them are looking at the cumulative impact of all of these projects and all of these problems. They're not looking at the cumulative potential destruction in a worst case scenario. And they're not paying attention to how ill-equipped we are to be able to handle that, because there has been so much economic divestment from housing, infrastructure, roads, healthcare, all to make a buck, all for private profit. We've had decades of not investing in that kind of infrastructure. And now in the space of just a few years, these private entities want to dump billions of dollars in polluting, destructing industries that will cause cancer, will cause higher rates of asthma, will diminish the health of human beings, while at the same time denying those same human beings access to health care. It's hideous, and it's got to be stopped, because the only reason why any of these projects are moving forward is just greed. It's just greed, and there is no public benefit, and there's no help for the people.
Absolutely. It all goes together. These are mutual, interconnected fights to protect our communities and the land we share. My last question for you before you go is, could you please share with our audience what you think gets missed in conversations about the Rio Grande Valley, about people living there, the local ecosystem, and the barriers you face? You've shared about this. Please add more.
To the original human beings of the land, if you want an indigenous perspective, the river called the Rio Grande River, or the Rio Bravo River, is a sacred river. It's known as the spirit river to our people. And it's sacred because it connects us to life itself. And, let's talk science for a minute. The source of fresh water for humans to survive on here in the Rio Grande Valley on both sides of the river is the river itself. It's literally sacred. It's literally what makes life possible, but not just human life, all the plants and animals as well. It's what makes life possible here in the valley. It is a river of life, but because of genocidal, fascist, settler colonial empire building, and I mean the United States of America and the United States of Mexico, because the ruling class of Mexico is a settler, white supremacist society, just like the ruling class of the United States of America is a white supremacist settler society. They are imposing upon that river the violence of a border that is getting tons of money to be policed and turned into a death sentence for anybody who tries to cross that river. Well, before colonization and before the genocide of Native people in this area, that river literally connected villages to each other on both sides of the river. And if you notice about how people live in the Rio Grande Valley, there are families that live on both sides of the river still. That is an ancient history that goes back to the beginning of human occupation, human living here in this part of the world. But within just a couple of centuries, it's being made to be a violent border of death, building walls which are environmentally destructive, which are wastes of money, which are destructive to land and people, and then building an infrastructure around there to criminalize people. Okay, that's literally happening a couple of miles away from SpaceX, a couple of miles away from LNG. What I want to ask people to pay attention to is the history of the land used to be a history of how human beings cooperate in order to survive and help each other live a beautiful life. But right now, what's happening with the wall, border militarization, with SpaceX, with the private build out of polluting and environmentally destructive oil and gas, all of that together is destroying a future potential of life. Human life, animal life, plant life, bird life, fish life, everything. These people, not reflecting the will of the people and certainly not reflecting the will of the original native people of the land, this cycle of destruction is what very wealthy oligarchs and fascist governments want to happen, but it's not the will of the people. I want people to understand that that's also going on here. All of these patterns of destruction, all of these anti-human, anti-life projects are not the will of the land. They're not the will of the spirits. They're not the will of the people. And we have to find a way to stop that cycle of death and get back to the cycle of life, the cycle of life that we had for thousands and thousands of years before capitalism and colonization and genocide. We've got to find a way to become more human again. And the way to become more human again is not this fictitious gateway to Mars by burning more fossil fuel. It's not by creating another layer of police violence against people.
Thank you for that perspective. And I couldn't agree more, especially about like bringing life back to this region. In these dark times, we need it especially. Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Basaldú, with the South Texas Environmental Justice Network. Here at Progress Texas, we're in the business of countering the conservative disinformation machine that's largely responsible for the election of Donald Trump. But while that machine is funded by oil billionaires, tech billionaires, religious right-wing groups, and more, we rely mostly on everyday Texans who value our hard work and share a belief that a Texas that works for everybody is the Texas we want to live in. We don't do subscriptions or paywalls because we believe the message of progress is one that everyone should be able to access, learn from, and act upon. So if you become a regular listener, we could use your support and no amount is too small. Thanks to Sean Hayward, Thomas Green, Darby Lockridge for their valued and ongoing support. Go to progresstexas.org/donate, and thank you for listening and for all you do to press progress forward here in Texas, in the Lone Star State. See you next time, and thank you again for joining.
The Progress Texas Happy Hour is a production of Progress Texas, a rapid response media organization promoting progressive messages and actions. Find us online at progresstexas.org and on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. The podcast is produced by me, Chris Mosier, and our featured music is by Walker Lukens. Please be sure and subscribe to the Progress Texas Happy Hour on the podcast platform of your choice. Take a moment to leave us a review if you've enjoyed the show, and be sure and tell your friends about us. Thanks for listening and for all you do to press progress forward here in the Lone Star State. We'll see you again next week.